Hi, today is January 25th, 2024, and I'm honored to have with me Dr. Andrew Zywiec, and I've been working on that. He does this for some reason. He's able to kind of have that word flow off his tongue more easily than I can. I have no idea why. Perhaps it could be experience. Andrew, tell us about yourself, your story, what your position is these days, and what are your struggles, and how can they benefit the rest of us?
Okay, it's a lot of stuff. So I'll try and start at the beginning and work my way through it. So I started school at the Ohio State University in biology and chemistry. I did a whole bunch of stuff at the university level. I did research in thermodynamics, lipidomics, protein biochemistry, a couple different labs, a couple different publications. I was really involved in research forums. I won the Denman. I was inducted into Sigma Xi, which is Einstein, Watson, Crick, Fermi, all those guys. Sigma Alpha Lambda, Golden Key, IDLS. I rode crew on the club team for a semester. I did like 20 credit hours in both the degrees and worked part-time, a whole bunch of stuff. So I had this really interesting, undergraduate journey. I went on to do a dual MD, MS with the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine, where I trained in neuroalgorithms and neuroimaging for the ADNI Consortium, which is the Alzheimer Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, while pursuing my doctorate in medicine at the same time with St. George's University, where I obtained my degrees, and that's in Grenada. So I was bouncing back and forth between LA and Grenada. I did some selective work in Prague, Czech Republic, where I got to do neurology and surgery and see the healthcare system in Praha, which was, again, amazing. I wound up, graduating with honors from those programs as well. And then I went and taught for a year in Jacksonville for the USMLE boards. And because I took some time in between residencies because my graduation days were off due to doing both degrees. And then I wound up in pediatric residency in New York because I changed my mind from surgery to peds. And that's when I started in New York at the beginning of the pandemic. And that's where the nightmare begins, so, I guess. So, during the COVID pandemic, I was one of the people who came out and spoke against all of the mandates. First and foremost, governments never use that kind of overreach in the medical system. So that was kind of a red flag. Secondarily, a lot of the stuff that they were doing just didn't make any sense. After 6 months, a virus that had like a 99% recovery rate, it was only affecting elderly, immunocompromised, things of that nature. They wanted to push like vaccines, and then they wanted children to get vaccinated. They wanted children in masks. The masks themselves, surgical masks aren't made for that kind of thing in the first place. So there's just a lot of issues that immediately sparked my interest. But then I went down the rabbit hole and started looking up the research. And started seeing some really scary stuff, DOD patents from 2014. We started seeing a lot of weird research that showed them integrating Hep B, Hep C, HIV, reverse transcriptase, coronavirus into like Frankenstein virus particles for the purpose of microarray PCR diagnostics. And then there was a lot of research that I read on prions and a lot of directed evolution, mutagenesis profiles. So just a lot of creepy stuff. I mean, people do a lot of stuff like this in labs all the time, but I just started getting really, an uncomfortable feeling about it. So I told all my patients not to get the shot. And, this is New York, like super liberal city. They're really against that. They, tinfoil hat, you're a lunatic, you're a conspiracy theorist. And, I tried pointing out some very simple things. If you mask up children, you create a baffling effect. They can't get deep intake of air. That threatens the mucociliary escalator, the IgA production. Your natural immune defenses get like a little bit circumvented. Little kids can't see facial expressions, so their neurocognition is going to be delayed. They have muffled voices now, so they can't hear correctly. So their hearing development is going to be challenged. Taking them out of school is going to wreck their social skills at such a critical juncture. Just very pointed on the nose, simple biology and simple medicine. And again, they didn't want to hear any of that. I was pariah, black sheep the whole time. And so that was challenging throughout, the beginning of my medical career. Then I wound up coming across Chloe Cole's story. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. She's a teenager out of California. She was put on puberty blockers at 12. and had a double mastectomy at 15. And then I started looking at more cases and realized that this is actually a thing. This is happening. I'd never heard of this before. In medicine, we study what transgenderism is, right? Incongruence between biological sex and, psychological thought. And that's supposed to be 0.01% of the population, extremely rare. You have to, be diagnosed after 6 months, and then it's therapy. I read this stuff and was just appalled. And I actually took it to my colleagues, and a program director actually stated, she's an activist. She got what she deserved. That's what she asked for. And these are people I worked with for years. And I was so shocked by that answer. Like my stomach turned, it was like looking at pure evil. And all of my colleagues who wear their rainbow pins and are social justice warriors, apparently couldn't tell the difference between a male and a female. I started like discussing these things with colleagues. I have text messages, all this kind of stuff. They were, thumbs down, you're a racist, like this kind. I was kind of blown away. So I was like, you guys realize men and women are different. And I started talking about things. I said, listen, let's go back to basic, biology. Men have more muscle structure. Men have larger skeletal structures. Neurology, I went back to my training. I said, the female brain is 10% smaller by weight and volume because of the cranial vault. They took that and they said that I was a misogynist, that I was saying women were dumb. I explained the difference between, I explained sexual reproduction and how that worked. They said that I, was a transphobe and a homophobe for saying that, for talking about sexual reproduction and evolution. It was just one thing after another. It was an interesting time. And I started speaking about this very publicly, about COVID and about, the transgender movement and things like that. And again, people, most people still to this day are saying that the transgender, surgeries in children are a lie, even with documentaries, even with hundreds of D-trans coming out. It's just been, it's like this really, I don't know, allegory in a cave, kind of world that we're living in, where up is down and down is right. Down is left. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much from which one could delve into your story there. But I'm just going to be superficial because that's how I roll. I'm always struck by the glib and easy nature by which the left takes up terms, and we have to follow. So we become the tail, they're the dog. And gender affirming care seems to be rather incorrect and an oxymoron. If I wanted to affirm my gender in any given day, I mean, I do it pretty much when I wake up in the morning, and you might as well. I stand when I relieve myself. So I pretty much feel affirmed, and I the whole concept, whether it's sex or gender, I think sex has its own different connotation as something lurid and whatnot. People, but sex, actually, the word comes from section. There's like Middlesex County and Essex and Wessex and Sussex, and those means the middle section, the southern section, east section. So it's an English term based on the Latin, and it's sectionality. So there's two sexes, means you've divided, made a division. And gender comes basically from the same type of thing as genitive. So it's from generation. In order to have a generation, you and I are presumably some generation from somebody else. And so there's progeneration. And so anyway, so they basically have the same kind of root cause, and they've been made into these subtly different words. But at any rate, whatever it happens to be, whether it's sex affirming or gender affirming, the actuality is when you affirm your gender means you've looked down and you've seen what you are. And so these words get taken and transmuted into something different, and that's Orwellian, obviously. On this kind of top level, what is gender affirmation in your view, and where has medicine gone wrong, and how easy is medicine to take from its fundamental roots and make it into something completely different? We used to. I'm sorry to make this question so long, but we used to look scornfully on Dr. Mengele, and I'm sure we still do, as Hitlerian and Nazi and whatnot. But experimenting on children and whatnot. If somebody had run along this concept of doing gender affirming care on Adolf Hitler, I imagine he would have been like thumbs up for the gypsies homosexuals and predominantly the Jews, but it would never would have allowed it for Germans. Have we come full circle on this?
I think we've come further than full circle, to be completely honest. I think Mengele was obviously a horrific doctor, and I think we're now seeing a whole generation of Mengele. That's where we've come to in time. Look, it's a complete delusion. What's a delusion? A fixed, false belief in something that is not rooted in reality. So this is all a delusion, right? And they're trying to get people to play along, and they've gotten medical doctors to forget very basic fundamental science. I'm blown away that in 2024 we're even having this discussion. But yes, you're absolutely correct. Gender affirming care would to be affirming the actual gender that you are, and there's only two. Sex is binary. Everybody knows this. We don't need big science or karyotyping or microscopes to be able to tell this. How did we know this, for the last, several thousand years? So when I look at this and I look at what doctors are doing, it's crimes against humanity. Very, very simple. When you think about this at a fundamental level, it becomes kind of shocking and macabre and when you pull the veil back and you think that a doctor is confusing a child, convincing a malleable, innocent young child that they're born in the wrong body so that they can block their puberty with similar or the same drugs that they use to castrate sex offenders, put them on cross-sex hormones and destroy and obliterate any natural biological processes of growth during a critical time in brain development and bodily development. And then they're hauling them into a fluorescently lit OR and carving off their breasts and testicles. When you think about it, this is a horrible book, like that would be banned from shelves. And as you said, it's very Hitlerian. It's very Nazi-like. In the medical system, we know that the medical system has a history of attracting this kind of individual, though, like the psychopathic narcissist. And I mean that because it attracts people that, let's be honest,
excluded, right?
Well, it attracts somebody like, that likes to dissect the human body, that likes to do surgeries, that more often than not, somebody that's very intelligent, somebody that's very driven, and when you put together the wrong mixture of characteristics and then you hand them a license, it's almost like, letting a criminal run a government, right? When you do these things, it's dangerous.
I would push back on that slightly. It was 1,000 years ago I went to medical school. But it was a bunch of people, guys, probably predominantly, but, men and women. And I think we look back, I'm 40 plus years out of medical school. I think that it's a reasonable bunch. I don't think there were that many psychopaths, if any, within our group. I actually think it's much more of a population sway, that people are far more malleable in their thoughts and beliefs, and they don't necessarily have bedrock beliefs, or they have them, but they're afraid, to say them based under social pressure. We've seen the social pressures that such as are put on, getting ablated from LinkedIn, getting kicked off of YouTube, getting, basically non-personed in your role, not be able to get jobs. The shaming and blaming is very effective, and most people want to keep their heads down, whatever their beliefs happen to be. Your last name is Polish. It's not a stretch for me to guess that. And Poland went through a Soviet period, not of their own choosing per se. And I spent time. You mentioned being in Prague. I was in Eastern Europe before the wall came down on basically a pleasure trip. We started out in Western Europe and we had time on our hands a little bit. I was between jobs, and now my wife and I, we traveled and we were on bicycles. We went, saw a lot of Eastern Europe and Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, East Germany. And the notable thing for me throughout East Europe was that people wouldn't look at you on the street and whatnot. They were staring at a place like 3 or 4 feet ahead of them. We were in the subway in East Berlin, and people only stared like where your feet would be. They did not make eye contact with each other, and nobody ever looked up. And I think the thing was they feared that if they engaged, something could happen, that somebody would think about something of them. They wanted to be non-people so they could get home and be in presumably the greater freedom of their four walls if they weren't bugged. And I think people have that now, that they've been, groomed, as it were, and like, the hairs in my head, they've been combed a certain way. So I don't think I kind of would push back a little bit on the psychopathy aspect to it, because I think there are some people who like that, who like the power, like the spotlight and whatnot, and are willing to bend the facts, Dr. Fauci, and whatnot. But I think that is really the minority. Anyway, sorry about that, but I carry on otherwise, unless you'd like me to come up with a question for you.
No, actually, like I would agree. But we live in a different world today. We really do. And look at the advent of social media. Look at all the shows on Netflix. Look at Amazon. Look at how much our society has truly changed. And it has just, I think it's bred more sociopathy, more psychopathy, more narcissists. Everybody's on their phone. Everybody's looking at themselves. I mean, we very much do live in a very dysfunctional world. And to be well adjusted to a sick society isn't healthy. It's sick. And I think that many people have become very well adjusted, and you're absolutely right. The greater freedom of your four walls, right? That rings true, and it's such a deeply disturbing thing to even realize that's happening. It's this communist agenda where they're trying to control the most deep and personal thing that you have, your own thoughts, your own feelings. What is truly internal to you is what they're trying to control, because if they can control that, they can control anything at that point. And they've pushed this. They've pushed this so heavily, and it's ingenious the way that it is, because they've separated everything. And we can go back to Rome and talk about that kind of history as much as we want, or we could bring it just a little bit closer up and say, hey, let's look at the 1970s. Let's look at the sexual revolution. Let's look at when they put all of these kind of radical leftists and all the radical feminists and all the drug addicted people and all of these people in high places, and they put them in the university settings. And now the chickens have come home to roost, and these things are happening. They put crack cocaine in the minority communities. They marketed abortion to African Americans, even though it's Margaret Sanger's company, who was a eugenist Nazi. They got Black people to perpetrate genocide on themselves. More Black children have been aborted than born in the state of New York over the last 50 years. They dissolved the nuclear family unit. They removed men from the houses. They taught women that they could be men, and now they've reversed the gender roles to attack the higher classes of the monetary system. It's just when you connect all these dots, it just gets so overwhelmingly simple. Like, you take all this complexity, and once you realize that it's by design, it all kind of falls into place, almost like the key just falls into the lock. Yeah. And the medical system's always been a part of this, right? The medical system and the military systems have always been deeply involved in these things. And when we look at what happened with COVID, we're looking at an experiment. When we look at transgenderism, we're looking at experiment, right? And at this point, it's on the whole entire world, because we have communication across the whole world. And the medical system, like I said, has a history of this. We look at Tuskegee, we look at the Stanford prison experiments, we look at the last time we treated mental illness with surgery, the transorbital lobotomy. We look at the last time doctors manipulated children and did surgical experiments, Mengele. It's not like, I think it's just that people don't want to see it, what's right in front of their eyes. I think
it's a tricky thing. A good fraction of people just want to do stuff so they can keep their job, get home, and relax, and feed their family, keep a roof over their head. There is, the intellectual class was much smaller, say 300 years ago, and it was rare to, when people, have the simple term high school, you and I probably went to high school. Well, back that term is interesting, because we don't really think of high school as something very high. That's kind of a base standard. And elementary school, again, go back 300 years ago in France or something like that. It was rare for people to go to elementary school. That meant that you became literate. There was not a high literacy rate amongst all populations wherever throughout the world. And high school, I mean, in France, they call it école supérieure. You basically are getting the superior knowledge. And to go to high school, it meant that you were going to have some actuarial or, some type of signatory role as an accountant or a lawyer or a chief or whatever. And so then to go to college, which, means to read together, collegium, and have these discourse and whatnot, and university where you're going to be discussing universal concept. I mean, those were very rarefied ideas and concepts, just a few hundred years ago. Now everyone goes to college. And we've made this kind of like cushy intellectual class where everyone has the opportunity to think, but they haven't necessarily, done that much to earn it because it's all kind of status quo. High school is no longer high. People graduate high school, they can barely read oftentimes in certain places. I think it's like in Baltimore, the literacy rate, there's like nobody at quote unquote grade level. So yeah, I think I agree with you. We've had a decay, kind of morally, but theoretically, intellectually, people have higher accomplishments. So there's more people, dealing on this intellectual level, but not necessarily without the, with the, kind of gradation necessary to have that. There's I think there's endless churning of credentials, so that somebody with a PhD, it doesn't necessarily mean that much anymore, because as we're finding, there's a lot of foofery and fluffiness and cotton candy aspect, which dissolves under scrutiny, light, or water, to these degrees. The recent ex-president of Harvard, leaving aside the plagiarism stuff, the actual stuff she was right. Even if she had written that stuff, it was jejune. It was like idiotic, kind of pablum that doesn't really pass for genuine research or complicated thought. And we see a lot of that throughout our kind of credentialed classes. And obviously we have our current president plagiarized multiply and claimed he was top of his class, but last of the class. So it's just kind of like success is not always branded with intelligence. I mean, I think that, I forget who said it, that the world is run by, C, grade C students. The geniuses, the brilliant ones, tend to be shunted aside because, nobody wants, they get kind of getting in the way. They're flies in the ointment. Anyway, that's my second diatribe. I apologize. But, I gather you're not, of average intelligence. How did it play? You were in the military as well. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. I went to the Army and did boot camp in 2006.
How did that work out?
It's amazing. It's lovely. Looking back on it, boot camp was actually an excellent learning exercise in what you're capable of, what you can set your mind to, what you can be put through. I think that it's probably very likely different now. 9/11 happened when I was, pretty young. I think it was a sophomore, if I'm not mistaken. It was sophomore or junior year of high school. I believe sophomore year. I was in English class. I remember seeing the towers get hit, and I remember talking to all my friends, and all of us were like, "Yeah, we're going to join." That our path had already been directed. It almost seemed like. But yeah, the military, I still have a lot of friends in the military. A lot of my friends who went overseas, though, a lot of them came back and commit suicide. I think a lot of them, fell into drugs and things like that. And then some of them came back and were able to, continue a life. And I have some of them that started families and things like that. But thankfully, I never wound up over there. My life went in a very different direction, which is a story for another time. But yeah, so yeah, long story short, yes, the military was eye-opening, but also, one of the things that it teaches you very young is, number one, you're property of the United States government. You are under a completely different form of law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You're no longer a civilian. You are a piece of property. They can, if you get a tattoo and they don't like it, they could charge you. Right. I mean, it's a very interesting thing to learn young. And then you realize that, at the end of the day, if somebody else tells you can go and kill someone, because in the infantry, that's what you train to do. There's no simple way to say it, no simple or subtle way to say it. You're training to kill people. If you kill people because they say so, perfectly okay. If you were to go and kill somebody for your own morals, your own ethics, and your own righteousness, you'd be locked in a cage forever. It's a very weird thing to understand very, very young, what happens at the decision making at higher levels. So I think that my eyes were opened to the way that the world really works fairly young. And I think that, in our current day and age, I don't think most people understand anything about how the world works. I think there's a veil over most of it.
So that's an interesting point. So you on your Twitter page, you have Christian, and I assume you're not talking about Christian Bale or Christian Glover.
I'm not.
So can you tell us a little bit about what that means and signifies for you, and how does that act as your beacon, and how has it worked out in the world of right and wrong and medical ethics?
I think that it took me a long time to come to my Christian faith. I was raised in the Catholic Church. I went to St. Ambrose, and then I went to St. Ignatius, so Catholic school, Jesuit school. Grew up in the church, but as anybody that's pretty young, you don't really question much about your faith. You just, that's what your family does, so that's what you do. When I got out of halfway through high school and then further along down the line, I kind of lost my faith. I became more agnostic, more science-based, wanted to read all the religions, wanted to read all the philosophy books and Kant and Hume and all of that kind of stuff and kind of branch away. It took me many years to come back to my faith, and actually more than ever, it's been, since I would say 2020. But the faith gives you a moral code. Right. And Christianity gives you a moral code to walk as Jesus did. And we obviously fail every single day brutally. But it does give you a standard above yourself, that you are not God and that none of this is yours. And, grace and mercy, which grace, I've heard it said quite eloquently, and I'll try to make this as eloquent. But grace is when you don't get what you do deserve, because we all deserve death. And mercy is when you are gifted with things. I don't know if that makes sense. But the point being that, it's not our money, it's not our house, it's not our earth, it's not ours. So everything that we get, we should be thankful for. And then, when you take faith and you apply it to ethics, it actually opens your eyes to patient autonomy and beneficence and non-maleficence and justice and why we should be thinking about these things. It shouldn't just be a week-long or a lecture-long thing in med school. It should be something that is the fundamental pillars of what we're doing in healthcare. So it keeps you rooted. It keeps you grounded, and just because we can doesn't mean we should. You see some really wild stuff happening. Last year, I think there was a doctor in Manhattan that took the sperm of a father and the egg of a woman and combined them, took the nucleus out of that, put it into a different egg to have a third party's mitochondrial DNA, and then put it into a womb and grew it up. And you couldn't do this in the States, so he did it in Mexico. So this is the first third parent baby. And why are we doing that? Then they use CRISPR technology to grow, knock out the growth inhibiting genes in animals so that they can grow up like these giant 3 times the size animals that have all these health problems. And why do we manipulate nature? Why do we synthetically destroy things? So I think that faith has led me in a very different direction than most people in the medical system. It's led me, even as an allopath, way towards more natural principles, and towards a better understanding of when you believe that the human body was designed and built by the greatest engineer of all time, you tend to think a little bit differently, because then you work with the body instead of against the body. If you look in emergency medicine, oftentimes, whenever somebody comes in, the first thought that we have is go against whatever is happening. They have hypotension, get it up. They have hypertension, bring it down. They have these kind of things. They have a fever, get rid of it. Well, I mean, these are really weird things, right? Number one, the body in many traumas, right? The body increases the hypertension or increases tension to hypertension so that you have permissive hypertension. So you can overcome the 65 millimeters of mercury that you need to perfuse the brain, because right now the body's saying, screw the heart. We need to keep the brain working. The heart needs to work harder to perfuse the circuit, right? So you have permissive hypertension. You can't obliterate that. You'll kill them. right? So the body is naturally doing what it is meant to do. When you get a fever, you're upregulating your immunological processes, you're upregulating your enzymatic activity, the body is gearing up for war while also destroying the pathogen and weakening it because it's not used to those temperatures.
Yeah,
Why do we give aspirin? Why do we give Tylenol immediately?
I love this. I'm also an allopath, but I'm a little bit of a nihilist or a minimalist, I guess would be a better term. Insofar as you can get away with having your fever, that is how you get better faster. It's kind of like silly putty. I don't know if you're of the age of having used silly putty, but basically you can stretch the image this way, you can stretch it that way, you can leave it as is. When you take the cartoon off the newspaper. Newspapers, by the way, for our listeners, were something that back last year. And so, you have a certain amount of sickness you're going to have. When you lower the fever, basically you're stretching out the time you're going to have the thing. It's kind of like having that battle without having a ceasefire. Ceasefires sound great, but sometimes they just keep the thing bottled up, so it's going to become the next conflict. And you're absolutely right. And just as a total side note, I've treated people with hypertension. I've treated hypertension with antihypertensives, but the fact of the matter is that hypertension per se is not an illness. It's really a data analytic term. We've decided to measure this thing, that's the pressure in the arm, but that's not a disease. That's potentially indicative of some other process, and people ignore what that other process is. Presumably it's your arteries getting narrower and narrower over time, and therefore your heart has to pump harder to get the blood to your brain. And just treating hypertension per se, if somebody had a 200 over X, or let's say make it more rational, like 170 over something blood pressure, and he's 70 years old, well, he might need that pressure to get, while he's standing up, to get the pressure to his noggin. You just lower the blood pressure, you've kind of lowered the perfusion rate to the brain. And so it's mostly kind of a clogging your arteries problem. The same guy when he was in high school probably was walking around with a blood pressure of 100 over 60, and he had his blood to his brain because his arteries were bigger. And so it's a little bit of a kind of we're treating something secondarily without addressing. I'm not saying you can necessarily undo all the atherosclerosis in the arteries, but you're kind of treating something that you see because you can see it. It's a little bit like that joke or parable of the guy looking for his car keys under the street light when he lost them down the dark alley. So we do what we can because we see things, but doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Anyway.
And just to touch base on that, it's just become so dogmatic. Exactly what you're saying. It's become so dogmatic. And the other thing is, a lot of students that are going into medicine don't have like significant background in their undergraduate studies, right? Because nowadays it's all about getting a grade and just progressing to the next level. Get the grade, progress to the next level without actually learning anything in the meantime. I've been teaching for the board since 2019, and I take it very, very seriously because I want my students to become good doctors and I want them to actually understand things. When I explain these kind of concepts to them, I talk about resistance in the circuit, right? And I say, listen, resistance, 8 times viscosity times the length divided by the radius to the 4th. Now let's break this down and understand that hypertension could be viscosity, that hypertension could be length. What happens when you gain a bunch of adipose tissue and you become obese and you have to vascularize 10, 15 extra pounds with thousands of extra miles of pipe? Add that to L. That's where your resistance is coming from. If you have viscosity profiles, add that to resistance, that atherosclerosis. Now we're narrowing. Now that's the biggest factor. And you start to just tease out the physics, tease out the biochemistry, what's actually going on in our metabolic processes, why these pathways connect, how you can connect all the macromolecules, how the body functions to, shift off from this process to this process. You start to explain all these things and you realize that most students have never been taught any of this stuff.
No, and if they were there, they were just there. We were getting kind of these gentlemen's, used to be the gentleman's C back in the era of, when George Bush ran against John Kerry, they made George W. They made fun of how dumb George W. was. And somebody managed to, dig out both of their grade sets, and they'd both gone to Yale. And back then there was a thing called the gentleman's C, which meant you went to class, you put in the papers and so on, but you got a C. You weren't extraordinary. And they were both had their transcripts littered with C's. But but at the end of the day, they were both Yale graduates, and they went on to illustrious careers. Blah blah blah. And but it was funny that one the pot was calling the kettle black in this case, and they were equally I don't know equally gentlemanly or equally not great students. And it shows up in their somewhat lack of logic about things, which is all well and good, because we can't expect everybody to be I don't necessarily want to leave things in the hands of geniuses per se. I think there has to be an adjudication. I think there are probably some reasonable, like Dr. Fauci, from what I gather. I wrote an article in Brownstone on Dr. Fauci a few months ago, and I think it's a great article. It's comprehensive, and so. But here's a bright guy. He graduated like summa cum laude from Holy Cross, and his kind of consort, in the journalistic world, is Donald McNeil at the New York Times, and ditto. He graduated from Berkeley with like some I think it was not only summa, anyway, it was one of the cum laudes, magna summa, whatever, in rhetoric, and again, very bright guy, but misguided, misled, and they've gotten away from some of the eternal truths. And I think it's a kind of a funny and interesting thing that some of our people make fun of the spaghetti monster in the sky, and people observing religion. It's all basically some kind of narrative transcribed by at any rate. But the fact of the matter is, the people with a religious backbone basically have a backbone. They have a spine, and everyone else is kind of molluscian. And no offense to squids and octopi who do have some little bit of a spine. They actually have some pen in there. It's a little bit of without sounding too selfish, they have a little bit of shellfish within them. But people have become gormless, spineless followers, and it's a sadness. I mean, it's an offense to sheep who actually do have a spine and backbone to call them sheeple. But medicine, I just can't believe how quickly and easily people have thrown out whatever baby they had there with the bathwater within their own brain workings. To let this happen, wherein they're doing some of the things you're talking about for castration and mastectomies for teenagers. I have, and this part may be the most unbelievable of all, but I actually have some friends, and that's the hard part to believe. One of my, amongst my friends, there are a lot of medical friends, and I have medical friends who have let their teenagers do this. And I'm just like, gobstruck about the whole thing. And I just don't understand why, if this person can't drive a car, this person would not be allowed to be in a tattoo shop. This person can't vote. This person can't understand groceries, doesn't even know like how much, what federal income tax is or how to go about it. And all of a sudden, this, you're going to let that minor, which is obviously a term of distinguishing, just like sex is minor and age is supposedly a fixed thing. You're going to let that person make decisions which are endless about his or her own life, and obviously going to require ongoing medical care for the rest of that person's decades, presumably on Earth. It's mind-boggling. I just don't understand how people do this. I think they shouldn't be doing it in general, mind you, but to let minors make this decision for you. I mean, my kid, for years, this may be giving away too much information. I'm sorry to my son, but for a couple, 2-3 years, walking around, until he was maybe 4 years old, one of my sons wanted to be Batman, and he was irate if you did not call him Batman, but we didn't put wings on him.
Yeah. I mean, it's, because I'm involved in this heavily at this point. So I'm trying to watch all these things and pay close attention and look at it from every different angle. And, they had to get society here from a societal and a moral and ethical decay to pull this off. Number one, it can be looked at as a control mechanism, right? Mao from communist China erased the genders. When you erase the gender roles, you're again, getting at the nuclear family unit and starting to dissolve that, which is probably the most powerful thing in a society. So there's that kind of aspect of it. There's the monetary aspect. If you can, for years, and I've done cancer research. We did research in actin plastin dynamics at Ohio State, and we, one of the things I was finding, and sorry about this tangent, but one of the things I was discovering with actin-plastin dynamics is actin is the cytoskeletal filament that makes up the skeleton and helps with cell motility and all sorts of other processes, and plastin bundles it. So instead of creating lamellipodia and finger-like projections with a stick at the membrane, you have a whole bushel of sticks. So it's a more forceful movement. When you have high metabolic demand or high turnover of cells, cancer metastasis, you upregulate the bundling activity by the protonation of specific residues, and that alters the tertiary structure of plastin, and then it regulates its functionality up. So we started digging into cancer research and stuff like that, and I realized when we were starting to get close to something, I won a Denman Research Award for this. The research got embargoed. It was shut down. We weren't allowed to do anything anymore. I started talking to other people that had come across similar things. So when we talk about these things, like, there are cures for cancer, or there's methodologies to help prevent or halt cancers, that research alone probably shows 5 or 6 different pharmacological pathways that you could start to manipulate to try and stop progression or metastatic disease. But when you see like that kind of thing happening in medicine, you realize that there's a deeper rot, right, about the monetary system. And where I'm leading this is that, it used to be that the elderly were the ones that were tapped into for their savings, for their money, for everything, because once they get sick, they'll pay anything to stay alive. Well, they've found a way to put that into the youth, so they get a whole lifetime out of you. So if they can convince a child that they're trans in the womb, which is what they're trying to do right now. There's activists and there's scientists publishing papers in neurobiology journals that are hypothetical, that talk about hormone washes and changes in the hypothalamic tracts and things like this that create transgenderism, which is hogwash, which is complete and utter pseudoscience. But anyways, if you can convince a kid that they're trans in the womb, well, they require psychiatry, psychology, pharmacology, close primary care follow-up, surgery, eventual institutionalization. You need the new labs, you need the new nursing staff, you need new clinics, new education, new professors, a whole new branch of medicine, new residencies, new pharmacy, new litigation, new lawyers, new judges, there's nothing it doesn't touch. It's a $1 billion a baby industry that we're seeing unfold in front of our eyes, and it's just the next evolution towards transgenderism, right? Towards transhumanism. Transgenderism is just another step towards transhumanism, and people don't want.
Define transhumanism.
Say again.
Define transhumanism.
So transhumanism is moving beyond human and starting to implement synthetics, right? And people don't really think that this is happening, but it's been happening for, it's been on the big stage for about 50 years, as far as back as I can look. But Kurzweil, in the early 2000s was trying to synthesize like nanotech red blood cells to monitor the body and be able to release anti-cancer agents at a keystroke. I think they're very advanced now, and they're almost close to getting that. Bionic medicine used to be thought of as something that was completely sci-fi, but we all know bionic medicine is obviously very real. Neuralink has come a long way. Back in the 2000s, they were able to, put a chip into somebody's arm, graft in some of the nerves. If you create an electrical impulse, because that's how nerves work, you can start to control the, finger movements from a computer keyboard. All this stuff is actually happening in big, tech research labs, MIT, Harvard, stuff like that. And because it's considered fringe, it's considered like conspiratorial, but this is stuff that's actually happening in the real world. And that's where we're going. And now they're talking about it on a world stage, and they're talking about it on a global stage. And, this transgender movement is a huge step into the transhumanism movement. And, again, that's where faith keeps you rooted. That's where faith keeps you rooted in natural process. And there's things that we should not be doing. But when you have a group of young people that have grown up on Hollywood and The Matrix and all these sci-fi movies, they're desensitized to this. Like, what's the big deal? Like, why not be like, if I could get a bionic arm, why wouldn't I get a bionic arm? If I can change my gender just at a whim, why not? I can be like, it's like a Fortnite video game or something. And that's this movement is leading us right in that direction. And that direction is total societal collapse at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Herb Stein, the father of Ben Stein, said that which cannot continue does not continue.
Yeah.
It's not a great quote, but it's pretty to the point. The funny thing is, that we've taken away the sanctity and we've taken away the special magic. So sex is like a masturbatory thing. It's a matter of, getting your relief. It doesn't matter who the person is. There's no emotion involved. We've tried to, make women into, curvy men emotionally. Women have should have far more emotional attachment to an engagement with the concept that person might get them pregnant and leave them pregnant as well. So there has to be a trust aspect. Men don't really work on their looks to the same extent because we don't have to. We have to work on our trustworthiness, our integrity, and our ability to combat adversity. And those are the things that attract women. And that's why you see those famous pictures of I don't know, let's say Tony Bennett at 80 with a 35-year-old girl on his hand, or Mick Jagger, ditto. Not to say that those guys are a genius, but they've demonstrated longevity and ability to make money, which is the symbol of coping in society, or ability to achieve and superachieve. But in many aspects, we've lost kind of our humanism as we've kind of transmuted and tried to get away from our basic instincts and our basic rationale and our social engagements and the obligations. We've become libertine. This is quoting Michael Knowles. With liberty and libertine have the same root word, but they are opposite in effect, because when you were a libertine, you basically become a slave to certain desires, and you became a slave to the emotions and so forth. And liberty requires restraint. It requires the ability to cut back and find some greater good, some longer term good, and the ability to carve through all the muck and whatnot, and cut through the vines in order to get the pathway you need to have. And it requires a greater vision. And so, a lot of what we're seeing now is a stepping away in the non-religious world from some of these basics. And we don't necessarily want the full religious world, because it seems like one of the only religions left, I'm not recommending it, but with kind of an integrity and a vision, is Islam. And it's a severe, stark, one that is anti-feminist per se, and it's a very masculine one. There were no real women, marauders on October 7th. It was a totally masculine force, and the army and the war is happening at a masculine level. But it has some kind of perverse and subversive power and effect on people, because it's growing despite all of this. And people are rejecting kind of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, which is not synonymous with Christian thought and ideals, but came because of those. It came from the allowance of the separation of church and state, basically. So where does this all lead us? I mean, Poland is kind of an interesting point. I know you have Polish heritage, and I'm sorry to harp on this, but Poland was admirable and emblematic. Lech Walesa and the Dansk Solidarność, whatever movement, Solidarity, was able to take down the Soviet Union. And that was the essence of critical Marxist theory and Marxism, and so forth. And it did, he did that through the Pope John Paul II, through the Catholic Church, through strength, through Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and so forth. Are we able to kind of see any hacking through all these Lilliputian, for Gulliver's Travels, shackles that are put upon us?
I think it depends on how we look at this, right? Because the world is going down a very dark path. And I think we see that everywhere. And, this is one of the reasons that I reached very deeply into my faith. The Bible talks about times like this. It talks about wars and rumors of wars in Matthew. It talks about, famines, plagues, and pestilence. It says that in the end times, people will be able to go to and fro. We've never been able to do that in the way that we're able to do that right now. Hop on a plane, this, that, the other thing. You look at what happened in Babel, right? When everybody could speak the same language and everybody could understand each other, and they were trying to build a tower to heaven to storm the gates. That's what we do with NASA, right? We're trying to break the firmament, that we're trying to get into outer space. We're trying to get to the moon, trying to get to Mars. And we can communicate with the entire globe. We have translation on hand, on device. I can talk to somebody in Syria today, London 5 minutes later. I can talk to anybody at any given point. It's just like Babel. And when all the people came together and could accomplish anything, look what God did. He scattered them across the earth and changed the languages so that we couldn't destroy ourselves. When you look at, what's happening with the river Euphrates, it's drying. It said in the, I think it's the fifth bowl would be poured out and the river Euphrates would dry. It talks about a 200 million man army in the East, which people thought that or 200 million men, that's impossible. You'd never get an army that big. Asia has an army that big. Asia and Russia and China and all of that. I mean, there's so much biblical prophecy that I lean towards to try and understand what I actually think is going on in the world. And people will say that that's crazy or so forth and so on. But from its accuracy for thousands of years, it seems to hit the nail on the head every single time. But I guess it depends on, when we look at this, is this dark path we're going down can we turn away from it individually? I believe that individually we can, but at the end of the road, no, this is the way that the world's always been headed. We have not gotten more sophisticated and better as a human race. Number one, there's nothing new under the sun. Human beings weren't different 2,000 years ago. The way that we think, the way that we feel, our emotions, the way we act, that has not changed. That we're not different, right? That macroscopic evolution garbage, you throw it out the window. It's trash. Human beings have not changed. What we've done is we've become more sophisticated in the way that we lie. The more sophisticated we are in the way that we manipulate the world that we live in, the more synthetic we are about, manipulating biology and manipulating the climate and manipulating the things that we eat and the way we farm, the way that we kill on a mass scale, right? It's insane to think about 2,000 years ago, a nuclear weapon, right, that could incinerate cities and millions of lives at once. The way we use biochemical weapons, and everybody also, it's funny in this day and age, people are saying, "Oh, biochemical weapons, that's a conspiracy." We've been using biochemical weapons since World War I. Like really, like sarin gas, acetylcholine. I worked with Callum at Ohio State. He worked with the DoD, I believe, on acetylcholine receptors and sarin gas and stuff like that. As far back as the ancients, they used to throw, rotting carcasses on trebuchets, that would explode and spread bacteria. Biological weapons. There's nothing new about what humans are doing.
Humans are crafty. We still are here, and there's more of us than ever before. I think I've read that. There are more people alive today than have ever died previously.
Sure.
It's close enough. I mean, it's within,
I wouldn't argue. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. It sounds pretty appropriate.
So despite all our foibles and whatnot, we do hang around, and we succeed, and I don't think we've had a tremendous upgrade on our sensorium. However, we have the greater capacity than the dog. Let's say we go back to the Roman times. Bring it to the Romans again. They had dogs. We have dogs. I don't let the dog, in if I'm going to do a podcast because he doesn't understand podcasts. I do. He doesn't. And so a Roman dog and my dog would probably get along just fine. They would, smell each other's whatever, and they'd get along or not get along just as at any given time. So I think you could get dogs from. They might not have had Bichon Frise or cockadoodles or cockapoos or whatever they are back then. But for the most part, you get like a shepherd and a shepherd, boom, they're going to be fine. We might be able to talk with Ben Franklin on a reasonable basis. And once he acclimated, give him a week or whatever, he might be able to get around here and vice versa. I think if you went back, to the American Revolution, give yourself a couple of weeks. I think you'd probably be able to, carry on. That is, the essence of things. But, we haven't had a significant upgrade. I like to point out that if you, look at facial expressions, you go to Papua New Guinea, some Aboriginal tribe, you give the guy, I don't know, a piece of candy, whatever. Once he eats it, he's going to have a smile. Give him a lemon, he's going to have the same face we do. We basically have a certain number of, faces and facial muscles, and those things are universal. Whatever language we happen to speak or don't speak, our faces communicate our desires and kind of mindset. So yeah, I think we're all basically on the same operating system, but we have a lot more capacity than the dogs do to understand things on a higher level than we did, say, 100,000 years ago.
Sure.
I mean, it's not to say we couldn't have understood it from, maybe 10,000 years ago, but we just didn't have those things. But clearly we've had the capacity, civilization, and the incredible wonders and splendors that men have created, shows that we have, the ability to build on things that other animals don't. It's both cooperative and individual. So, I'm going to step away from some of these ethereal items and talk about the realities of your, day-to-day four walls life. I noticed, I came upon you through Twitter, and so thank you, Elon, and even Jack Dorsey, I guess.
Thank you, Elon.
But I noticed that you had a case against a legal case against it was Brooklyn Hospital, and I noticed you're in Ohio. So what are you doing now? What was that case? How are things proceeding? What are your current battles and work? And then we'll try to round things out and figure out how people can contact and follow you.
Yeah, sure. So the case, once again, I didn't want to perform gender affirming care. I refused to perform gender affirming care. I was standing against COVID mandates, bullying, harassment, just a whole slew of things. That's all over and done with. I'm now in Ohio. I do private practice. I've gone completely into like holistic, naturopathic, integrative medicine. I also still teach for the boards, which I love teaching students, and so I'm going to continue doing that. I'm trying to. I'm working with some congressional leaders on COVID and on gender affirming care, and trying to make sure we can get laws passed and things so that these things stop happening and then don't happen again. I'm working on getting a coalition of doctors together against gender affirming care, which is also on my Twitter. So there's a lot of irons in the fire. I'm actually also working a little bit on some cardiology research in multifunctional cardiogram, which I think is, going to overtake EKG very, very shortly here. So it's, like I said, there's a lot of irons in the fire. So as far as where things are going now, we'll see. And as far as, contacting me, zywiecandporter.com, people can go on that site. It's still like halfway broken, so I apologize if it's a terrible site. They can follow me on Twitter, Andrew Zywiec, MD. I go on TikTok lives and do pro-life abolitionist discussions and discussions against gender affirming care and things like that. So there's a whole slew of ways to get a hold of me or to reach out to me or anything like that. At the end of the day, I'm happy for anybody who does reach out. Yeah, there I am. And that got banned again today, this morning.
Yeah, oh wait, you're back. Earlier this morning you had 0 following and 0 followers. So in the arc of one day, I was just checking up to see if you're going to be on my show today, and so I thought I'll just text him on DM you on Twitter, and nothing happened. You just disappeared. It was a white screen. So I went on the computer and nothing. And then like an hour later, you're back on Twitter, but it had 0 followers. I should have screen captured it.
This happened. This is not a rare occurrence. Just look again in a couple of weeks or so. This happens constantly and consistently. When you speak out, even on Twitter, which is supposed to be the bastion of free speech, even on Twitter, when you speak out about the wrong things, they're not happy and they want to cancel you. I noticed,
there's the Linda Yaccarino era, or error, either one. When Elon was there, I've got 6,000 followers, but I had been off Twitter for a while, and I just rejoined about a year ago. I mean, I didn't rejoin, but I rekindled about a year ago, and I was doing these video casts and whatnot, and my viewership, went up. I went from like 0 to 5,000 in 5 months, and I thought it was just going to keep going, and it just kind of stalled. When Linda Yaccarino came along, it just has been steady, and I don't really get the reach and whatnot. So it's kind of like the same algorithm stuff. I actually did speak with somebody from Twitter on this because I've been giving them money, and anyway. But
yes, it's a similar thing. I was off social media, as a doctor. I was never really on social media. I got back in 2022, got almost 10,000 followers, and then everything got shadow banned.
Yeah.
And now now I'm lucky if 50 people come and find me.
So there's also, you have a Substack.
Oh yes, I forgot about that. I have a Substack, a tribaldoctor.substack.com. I write about a whole slew of different topics from quantum biophysics to length contraction and time dilation to medicine.
This one says the first called. Is there another one?
No, that is the only. No, it's the first called. That's the name of it. But the website is a tribaldoctor.substack.com.
I can't pull that up right now. And then you have some books as well.
Yeah, sure. That's 45 kilograms. That was something I wrote, almost like a poetic journey through medical school. It's a short read, good read.
What is 45 kilograms? 90 pounds? What does that mean?
Read the book. You got to read the book, Doc.
Oh my God. All right, I know how to read. I mean, I can't claim ignorance there. And apoptosis, which is cell death, I guess.
Yep.
Tell us.
Yeah, so Apoptosis Madman. It's a short novella that I wrote. I started it in undergrad. I completed it. In residency. So it took a long time. Originally, it was I think about 1,000 pages, and I whittled it down to a much shorter book. It's an interesting book that follows a man named Dante, the protagonist, through a very, very interesting series of unfortunate events in his life, where the world is kind of upside down and he's trying to make sense of it. Which shockingly, it almost predicted the kind of world we were living in when I started writing it, before the world kind of went this direction. But yeah, that's another one that I wrote over a period of several years.
So, before we leave, I got a quick question. What is Disease X?
Disease X. I've heard a lot about this. I haven't dug too deeply into it, first and foremost. But what I would say is, if coronavirus taught us anything, when they're building the disease and they're the ones with the disease and the cure, that's what big pharma really is. When they to take a simple analogy, when they push the food pyramid and they warp all of these things, because our nutritional program in the United States is garbage. When they make you obese and they make you fat and they push laziness and they push garbage food on you, and then they have all the drugs and all the antihypertensives and all the statins and all this garbage, it's a money pit on both directions, right? So it's, the left hand shaking the right hand behind everybody's back so nobody sees it. So I would say the disease axis, it's already built, it's already made, it's probably already been made for a very long time, and how it's going to play out will be probably very similar to COVID, but hopefully people don't comply.
So I think it's actually kind of an impossibility. It's an internal contradiction. It's basically an oxymoron. Not that I've delved deeply in this, but the stipulation, first of all, it's a hypothetical thing that's supposedly going to come around the corner sometime. We have to be ready. So we have to, generate this WHO kind of supervention of national rights and so forth. So WHO is going to be our big new granddaddy, come in and take over governments around the world, and or the ones who don't agree are going to have, basically sanctions against them. If Tanzania, doesn't buy into COVID and it doesn't buy into disease X, bad things will happen to Tanzania. But the stipulation is that it's a disease that will be 20 times more deadly than COVID. That's when something like that happens, it's going to be a bad thing for the whole world, and we have to have the WHO, the benighted rulers, come in and take over. But the funny thing is, the oxymoron part for me is that they're kind of conflating transmissibility with danger, with virulence. If you have something that's 20 times more deadly, basically you can't get it transmissible enough to be a worldwide.
It'll kill itself out real quick.
It's a yin yang kind of thing. This is why we don't have mass Ebola. We've heard been threatened and challenged and scared and fear mongered over Ebola over and over and over again. Somebody from Ebola landed at Dulles Airport. Oh my God, Washington. No, it doesn't happen. Basically, something burns bright, it burns quick. And it's the difference between a firecracker and a forest fire. In order to have a forest fire, you have to have transmissibility. It has to be kind of a low level event. Boom, boom, boom. Firecracker, goes so quickly, it doesn't light the tree on fire. You might burn your hand. So one person get hurt by a firecracker, but if you put a firecracker in the woods, it's not necessarily going to do it. You lay a lot of gasoline, you can arson a fire, but you can't necessarily do it with a firecracker per se. So they're kind of like making this category mistake right from the get-go over disease X, and that they're bandying about and making world treaties over it. And it's just like, dude, come up with something better than this. Like,
but they know that they can, because of what you just said. Let's say that most epidemiologists know that, or something like that. Most standard doctors don't remember that from med school. I just mean this. Most people in the lay society, and even most people in the upper echelons of education, I'll say, don't know this stuff. They got away with murder during COVID. Everything they did about COVID was nonsense. It all defied very basic sciences, but guess what? Every scientist just ran with it because somebody was telling them what to do.
They should just take away the word scientist. A long time ago, when the drug detail people came in, they were drug salesmen. When I started, they were called drug salesmen. And they had a tough time because nobody wants to see a salesman. Death of a salesman kind of ruined the word salesman in the 50s and 60s and whatnot. And I kind of come around on salespeople. I do think they have a role, but I think they should change their name to knowledge conduits or whatever, information conduits. And so they don't necessarily sell something. They tell you about something, you make a choice. And so salesman kind of has a bad term. In the converse, I've kind of lost my train of thought here, but we have to get back to seeing the reality. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The scientists, perhaps their term is too like salesman is too bad a term. It's been a sullied term. Scientist has been too revered a term. Applying something as science and follow the science, it turns into dogma. When the essence of science is debate. Science has basically two definitions. One is the body of knowledge. We say, oh, that's the science. And so follow the science, that body of knowledge. But the other aspect of science, the definitional aspect, is that it's this part of debate, of an ongoing discourse, and it can never be settled, despite what Al Gore thinks about it. The algorithm of science is that you have to have continual, adjustment. It has to be something that's percolated endlessly. And so, it's a lunacy. So I think scientists have been, kind of going through, basically become a clergy, and they've been going behind their own cloaks. And the oddity is that they make a bad religion. Religion has been better at being religion than science essentially has been at being science of late, in part. And anyway, to that point, I'm going to segue into something, unless you have a rebuttal or comment on that, I'm going to segue into the self-promotion part of our podcast.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so you may or may not be familiar with my massive tome here. It's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. And many people, with our short-term memory issues, may not remember Zika, but it was the biggest pandemic to its time before this other thing showed up. And I'm not a tropical disease guy. I'm not an infectious disease. I'm not a pediatrician. I'm not a neuro. I've never seen a case of microcephaly. I've never treated Zika, whatever. But along the way in 2019, frankly in 2016, but then kind of reminded by social media and Facebook on 2019, I was like, whatever happened to Zika? It disappeared. And it was supposed to be this big thing where like 1 million babies with microcephaly would be around, coming extra around the world because of this new illness Zika, which we'd never covered in medical school because it was not a human illness, but it's basically a dengue. And I don't want to get too far into it, but long story short is there are 4 dengues, and really there are 4 human dengues, and really Zika is the kind of the other primate, maybe a monkey dengue from Africa and whatnot, but never caused human illness. And none of the dengues ever caused microcephaly. None of the flavivirus ever caused any congenital problems, so forth. But it was stipulated in 2015 Brazil that Zika had shown up, and then it was causing the microcephaly. There was no real good science at the time. There was no Zika test. There was no microcephaly registry. Nothing to compare it with. It was really shoddy science, and yet it took over the globe. There were travel advisories. People, kind of stayed away in droves from the Rio Olympics in Brazil in 2016, and so forth. And it has not been rescinded or retracted or reformulated or anything. It's just
I was actually in Grenada during that. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal down in the Caribbean.
Right. So yeah, I know a lot of secondary stories, but it was used as a cudgel to basically overturn the abortion laws in Latin America, Brazil in particular, but other countries as well. And also there was the WHO aligned physicians told some of the leaders who told their people not to have babies at all until there's a Zika vaccine. And right now it's 2024. There's still no Zika vaccine. There's probably one around the corner now, but there'd be nobody in elementary school, as we mentioned, or nursery school, or whatever, if the people had listened and stopped having babies because of Zika, which frankly never caused microcephaly in the first place and never did again. So that's the essence of my book. It's called Overturning Zika. People should go out and buy it. If they buy it, they can help support my video cast here and get interesting guests like Andrew Zywiec.
Zywiec.
All right. And even better if they read it. And if they read it, they can leave a review and so forth. But this is a real formulation that kind of casts a pale on what science thinks it is. Because I put this book and earlier papers, shorter papers. I have an article in the American Journal of Medicine, this and that, in front of all the science. I culled 1,000, 1,200 different scientists who've written on Zika, and I put them in the spreadsheet, got emails, blah blah blah, and I've sent out a personalized email, and I've got a response rate of basically the coronavirus death rate of like 0.0.
1 per 100.
Yeah, 4 per 1,000 or whatever responses. I got basically like fewer than a handful of responses, and a couple of people are interested, like one or two, but for the most part it's total crickets. They have no real interest in reformulating because they're getting paid on Zika grants. Why would they chop off the hand that feeds them? Is kind of like the thing. And I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I am a noticer and I'm an observer, I think. And
that's the definition of conspiracy theorist right now. That is the new definition. We took back the word. Conspiracy theorist just now means you have eyes and you see them.
So I'll buy your book if you buy a few of mine.
Deal.
All right. And we'll talk a little bit more offline, but we're going to say goodbye to everybody else. Thank you for listening. And thank you so much, Andrew, for being on my show.
Of course.